Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us, Miguel Delaney, the chief football writer of The Independent, and Ian Ladyman, football editor for the Daily Mail. Welcome to you both. Let's run you through those back pages. In the Times, time to listen to tired stars, says Alisson, as Liverpool prepare to start a new 8-game Champions League stage. Into the Telegraph, which covers Premier League clubs apparently being upset by the secrecy over the Manchester City hearing for more than 100 alleged breaches. We'll talk about this in the Eye as Erik ten Hag challenges Antony to prove he's worth more than £80 million. Manchester United in EFL Cup action on Tuesday. In the Express, as Aston Villa prepare to return to the Champions League, one of the men that helped them win the European Cup more than 40 years ago, Gary Shaw, has passed away. And Haaland says the Sun, Jorginho and his Arsenal teammates have taken to laughing at the incredible Norwegian striker at Manchester City. But we will start with Alisson, the Liverpool goalkeeper, who has been speaking ahead of their Champions League opener against AC Milan on Tuesday. Of course, a repeat of the 2005 and the 2007 final. But the Times go with time to listen to tired stars as Liverpool and everyone else in this new expanded Champions League, Ian, prepare to face 8 group games, potentially 2 more before you even get to the round of 16. It hasn't taken long before players to start discussing the extra workload. Ian.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm glad that he said it. I'm glad that Alisson said it. He's not the only player to say it. Bernardo Silva at Manchester City said it last week. Rodri said it last season. Rafael Varane at Manchester United said it. But the question is anybody listening? Because the people who do need to listen to this are the football clubs that these big stars play for. Because I'm afraid this ever increasing fixture schedule is nothing other than a manifestation of football clubs' greed. Who wants an expanded Champions League? The clubs want an expanded Champions League. Who wants the Club World Cup that's been expanded to 32 teams and will take place next summer? The clubs want that. When managers talk about fixture congestion, they don't really mean that their teams play too many games. What they mean is that they play the games that they don't really want to play, i.e. the Carabao Cup games, the FA Cup replays. What they want to play are these games, the games that make them the money. That's why we have an expanded Champions League. Plans for the European Super League fell down. This is the second best alternative as far as our big clubs are concerned. They all wanted it, and UEFA have given it to them. And the workload is carried by the players. So I'm afraid people like Alisson, as eloquent as he's been in speaking about it today, then he needs to come out of that press conference and go and find a Liverpool chief executive, Liverpool owners, and land it on their doorstep, because that is where this belongs.
Yeah, and actually that's the point. I mean, in his quotes, Miggs, he says, we would like to understand what is the thinking of the direction that football wants to go, and not only adding games, adding competitions, adding this, adding that. I mean, Ian's right, isn't it, that the reason is to make more money?
Yeah, and Ian's touched on something bigger there. I mean, when was the last time players confronted executives in that way? Well, it was the Super League. And why do we have this competition, this expanded Champions League? Well, let's not forget, this was brought in because the big clubs, led by England's Big Six, Juventus, Real Madrid, Barcelona, they held the threat of the Super League over UEFA for so long that it gradually UEFA gave in more and more to threats of a breakaway. And this specific idea for the Champions League, now it was supposed to be worse. It was supposed to be 4 groups of 8 or potentially 6 groups of 6. They were among Andrea Agnelli's more kind of out there ideas, but that is now seen as it was an attempt to just shift the debate. So this was more acceptable. But this came in those negotiations where they were holding the Super League over UEFA. Then they went and did it anyway. But what was so remarkable about it was the day after the Super League was launched, UEFA actually ratified this system. They voted it through. Now 2 games have been removed from that, but it's still 8 in the creation of this what is now kind of a never-ending football calendar. I mean, it's, I think, one of the biggest changes to the Champions League this season that's been a little bit overlooked. It's not just that the 2 extra games. It's actually that those 2 extra games take place in January. So essentially, it's a continuous European season. There's no break. It's already meant, or one of the effects has been, that the Premier League clubs lose the extra break in the middle they used to get in January, where the 10 teams would play and 10 teams would essentially get a week off. And yeah, it comes from all these forces together. UEFA and FIFA are complicit in the FIFA situation. Well, Infantino has basically seen the wealth of the club game, and he wants part of that for FIFA. Also, that's tied into issues of kind of raising revenue in order to fulfill election promises to as many voters. But of course, what's going to happen with the Club World Cup? And I suppose this is where it comes back around to Ian's point as well. Well, one of the estimations of the Club World Cup, FIFA do need to, they haven't guaranteed the prize money yet or say what it's going to be, but it's expected it could be up between 40 and 80 million for participation. And where will most of that go? Well, it's estimated 75% will go to the players already earning the most in the game, just fulfilling this. Well, it's kind of a needless race at this point. That is sort of, I mean, like, look at this. We're on the brink of a new season, and all we're talking about is extra games and the problem that comes with it, rather than the excitement of what the game is. And there is a sense that, you know, everything is built up as a big game, so none of them really are the same. I mean, this Champions League group stage, there's loads of former finals replayed, like Inter against City, Real Madrid against Dortmund, Real Madrid against Liverpool, Milan against Liverpool. But and that's what the big clubs wanted. They wanted it since the 80s through Silvio Berlusconi. But it just doesn't feel, it's like they don't feel proper events in that way. Not least because there doesn't seem that much cost or risk to this league stage. It's quite easy to get through to the next round. That
was going to be my question, actually. Miggs talks there about the excitement, and UEFA have sort of billed this as, actually, it's way more exciting because there are more teams alive until the final match day, because you can get through to a playoff stage even if you finish 24th out of 36. Do you buy that that's the main reason for doing it? Or, as Miggs said, the main reason is that a lot of big clubs in Europe threaten to take their toys and go and play elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason for this is money. The reason for this is to get games between the so-called super clubs to take place more often, earlier in the competition, instead of having to wait later on for the knockout stages and the quarterfinal, semi-final, etc. It's to give the big clubs what they want, which is the big games as soon as possible, but also with the safety net of knowing if they were to lose one of those big games, then the chances are they'll still get through, because it's the format that's heavily loaded in favour of the bigger team. So it's as simple as that. It's about money. Is it what the players want? We don't think so, because more and more players are telling us that it's not what they want. Is it what the supporters want? Not necessarily. Talking to a friend of mine earlier tonight, who's a huge Manchester City fan, and he can't make the game on Wednesday night against Inter, and he's not bothered, because he knows that there'll be another one round the corner pretty soon. And I'm afraid that there is a danger, even given how much we love football, the appetite for football in the public in this country, which does continue to astound me and impress me in equal measure. There is a danger that at some point familiarity will breed contempt where European football is concerned.
Ian, I just want to stay with you as we move into the Telegraph then. At Manchester City's hearing has got underway on Monday. Jeremy Wilson, the chief sports reporter in the Telegraph. Clubs upset by secrecy over City hearing. We know it's begun. We're not going to get too much more detail about it effectively until the findings are released in who knows how many months' time. One lawyer who's been working with another Premier League club in Jeremy's piece, Ian, says justice does not just need to be done, it needs to be seen and done. Are you uncomfortable with the lack of detail that could potentially come out of this?
No, I can understand why clubs are want to know. Of course I understand that. Equally, I'm not sure there's a huge precedent for it. I don't think, the Everton, although it was on a smaller scale, the principles were the same. The Everton hearing was held in private. Written reasons were then released by the Premier League after the judgment was made. Same with clubs like Nottingham Forest or Leicester, for example. So as far as I'm concerned, when we reach the conclusion of this, which could be weeks and weeks and weeks, and then, of course, the chances are there'll be an appeal. But when we do reach the conclusion, when judgment is delivered, I think then we are all, and football, for other football clubs, football supporters, for the good of the game, are absolutely entitled to have details, written reasons, and the bones of the case, because this is a desperately, above all, this is a desperately sad day for English football, whichever way this case goes, to have our league in court with its own champions. A team that, I know this isn't relevant to the case, but the fact is they played some of the best football that any of us have ever watched in the last decade. And to find ourselves here in this situation is desperately sad. And so I think the one thing that all of us deserve at the end of it is to find out exactly what went on and why during this court case. However, I'm not sure a blow-by-blow account every single day is necessarily what the football clubs particularly are entitled to, and it's certainly not what they're going to get.
Migs, a lot of fans will talk about some of the clubs that Ian just mentioned there, the Nottingham Forest, the Evertons, but this is an incredibly different case or set of cases. A lot of this is really, really complex. You've tried to break it down a little bit. If you can summarise concisely, tell us about Jabir Muhammad and the significance he holds in these charges against City.
Well, it's interesting, I suppose, just as you raised the point about the previous cases. I think because naturally the very source of this was about FFP, that has led to some discussion about whether whether this is about the merits of PSO or whether the Leicester case is relevant to this, given that was about the drafting of the Premier League's own rules. But it's not. This is actually much more simple. It's simple, but as a consequence of that, complex, which is essentially about. I wrote a piece a year and a half ago, the day the charges were announced. It is about fraud and essentially the disclosure of information. And yeah, in the case of Jabir Muhammad, it's difficult to sum up. Essentially, this goes back to a detail that came out through a YouTube documentary last year. That was because they managed to get their hands on the initial UEFA report from 2020, the one that initially saw City banned for 2 years, in which, and obviously so much of this is about the issue of whether equity has been disguised as sponsorship. So in this case, and this comes from City's own information, the own evidence submitted in the UEFA hearing, where it was found that at that point, ADUG, the name of the company that owned, that Sheikh Mansour owned City True at that point, caused for 30 million to be paid on behalf of Etisalat through this broker called Jabir Muhammad. Now, there are all sorts of questions for that, like why a telecoms a part state-owned telecoms company from Abu Dhabi and ADUG would need a broker. Also, given the details that have come out that Etisalat didn't pay anything until 2015, why? There's a big question there over how there was a situation where the club allowed a sponsor to enjoy all the benefits of sponsorship without paying anything for 3 years. I've never heard of anything like that. And just the point of all this is that these are questions that are going to have to be answered in this case. They didn't come up in the Cass case because essentially they were time barred. This is one of the crux issues, that there was the judges ruled, two of the judges had a different interpretation over when the statute of limitations applied to the other judge. So the entire Etisalat example and the issue of Jabir Muhammad, Cass didn't have to deal with it. But it's expected statute of limitations won't apply to the Premier League because of the way the rules are drafted as much as UK law. So this is one big question that City are going to have to answer. In the initial UEFA report, it said this was basically, this was never explained. And that's what led to the 2-year ban. That was a big reason that led to the 2-year ban in the first place.
Yeah, just to stress, of course, Manchester City deny any wrongdoing. Let's move across Manchester, Ian, to Manchester United. Back of the eye, Ten Hag urges Anthony to prove he's worth £84 million. The evidence so far would suggest that he's not. How does he change that?
Yeah, evidence pretty scant at the moment, I would say. Well, it's very simple, isn't it? He improves it by getting in the team and playing. He'll be upset at the moment, Anthony, that he's not been getting his chances. He's not getting his chances because he doesn't deserve them. And there are players in the team, even a slightly up and down Manchester United team, who are who are deserving of that spot at the moment. Ahmed Diallo has done brilliantly, I think. And Marcus Rashford has shown some sparks of form, and that's before we even talk about Alejandro Garnacho, who I think is a deeply talented player. Look, Ten Hag's got a vested interest in Antony proving his worth, because if he does that, he'll go some way to proving his manager's own judgment in the market. Antony is a Erik Ten Hag signing. He was one of his biggest. He needs him to come good for his own sake as much as anything. But I have to say, Miguel, I'm not sure what you think about this, but all the times I've watched Manchester United play with Antony in the team, I have seen barely a flicker of him being a Premier League footballer, never mind an £84 million Premier League footballer. He has got so much to do if he can prove that he is worth even a half of that transfer fee, I have to say.
Migs?
Yeah, it's remarkable. And I mean, there's one finish that Antony has that I like. I think that's about it, basically. As Ian says there, yeah, there's so much to prove. And he's become, I suppose, another symbol of this era of waste at Manchester United, given the number of players that they paid huge money for, that they didn't maximise in any, or didn't come close to maximising, or getting much use out of it all. Sancho is another one, and I suppose that was all the more pointed, given his contribution for Chelsea at the weekend.
We will take a quick breather there. Lots to talk about when we come back, though, including this in the Times. Declan Rice has borrowed one of Miguel's blazers for a little photo shoot there. And we'll also talk about his teammate Jorginho, who's called Erling Haaland a joke, but in a very good way. Welcome back to Back Pages tonight. Miguel Delaney and Ian Ladyman are with us this Monday. The Champions League is back then, and for some, maybe those extra games are a bit of an inconvenience, but I'm sure it'll be a delight for Aston Villa, who return to the biggest stage of all, and perhaps there is some poignancy, Miguel, that they do so just a day after the passing of one of the men who helped them reach the top of the mountain against Bayern Munich in 1982, Gary Shaw, who's very sadly passed away. And Unai Emery saying, win it for Gary, an absolute club legend at Aston Villa.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The poignancy, and even the fact that the first home game is going to be against Bayern Munich, who Shaw was so brilliant in beating in that final in 1982. The fact that he misses it, it's very sad and adds a real kind of a tinge of tragedy to what is going to be an emotional campaign for many reasons for Villa. But of course, also then, as Emery's kind of very touched on with great dignity there, offers also an emotional motivation. So it's going to be, it's when they eventually play Bayern in 2 weeks' time. It's obviously young boys tomorrow, young boys this week. It's going to be a really special night at Villa Park.
I think it was your piece I was reading earlier, Migs, about something that one of the Bayern Munich defenders has said about Villa back in 1982, about them having no chance of winning. You'll probably give me the exact phrase. But Ian, it's interesting that how the game has changed. Back in that mid-80s period, the likes of Aston Villa won it, Nottingham Forest won it twice in a row. Is the Champions League, or does it feel a touch of a closed shop in terms of the teams who are actually capable of contesting the final come the end of it?
Yes, it does. I have to say that. I'm old enough to remember Gary Shaw, remember that Villa team, remember the Forest teams you're talking about, the Liverpool teams. I absolutely remember that era when English football did dominate what was called the European Cup. Is it a closed shop now? It's as close as possible to being that in terms of winning it. Because at the end of the day, despite we all live in this world now of FFP, etc., but it still comes down to revenues. It still comes down to money. It still comes down to who can afford the best players in a way that it didn't do in the past. I think in the past, when some of we're talking about back in the 70s and 80s, away travel for some of the big teams was more arduous than it is now. Going behind the old Iron Curtain, there was a lot more jeopardy. You could get slightly strange results back then in a way that you don't necessarily now. That's not to say that there absolutely isn't opportunity for a team like Aston Villa to get out at this stage and to impose themselves and to reach the knockout stage. They're absolutely good enough on their day. I remember being at St James's Park last year when when Newcastle beat PSG 4-1, I think it was. What an extraordinary night that was on Tyneside. Miggs has touched on it there himself. That Villa game against Bayern Munich in a couple of weeks in Birmingham will be some night to be at. It's just about squad depth, isn't it? Can Villa maintain a campaign on both fronts? It proved too much for Newcastle, pretty much on both fronts last season. Can Villa improve on that? It's down to injuries, fitness, and form. But they're certainly good enough on their night and on their day to leave an impression on this competition. I have to say the job that Unai Emery has done there, they are an impeccably coached football team. They are brilliant to watch. And yeah, it's if I was an Aston Villa fan, as long as I could afford to still go, given some of the ticket prices that they've been hit with in the last week or so, if I could afford to go to those games, goodness me, I'd be excited by it.
Let's just finish then with another game we're all excited by coming up, Miggs. Manchester City against Arsenal. Jorginho describing Erling Haaland's scoring record this season as a joke. Might not be laughing too much if he carries it on at the weekend, but it's already nicely poised. It felt a huge win for Arsenal at Spurs yesterday. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's maybe reshaped a bit of the kind of tone around the game, because there maybe was that fear after Arsenal's injuries that they could drop points to Spurs, and this had the potential to open up a gap where they'll be too far behind City. And of course, the gap of 2 points is already opened because of Haaland. I mean, I was thinking it as he scored yet another little chip at the weekend. I can't think of too many strikers, certainly in the modern game, that had his prolific nature of finishing, with also the rangy finishes he has. He scores, I mean, we've seen the powerful finishes, the really scruffy kind of poacher's goals that Van Nistelrooy used to get, and also now some of the cleanest strikes you'll ever see. And I mean, some of the players I think that are kind of almost close to it. Ian Wright, maybe, Robbie Fowler in the Premier League era. But it's just another way that he's extremely distinctive, Haaland.
Just in a word or two from both the Champions League winners are, Miggs?
I've got a feeling for Arsenal this year, actually, because of the defence.
Ian?
Well, he's stolen that out of my mouth, so I can't say the same as him. So I'll switch horses and say Manchester City.
Chaps, thank you very much indeed. Good to have your company this evening.